I think like the idea too would be like how exchanges go on if you're in a revolution, because that I think is really difficult.
See, that's interesting too, and there's a lot of that's a whole nother segment. There's a lot of potential there because I mean there's a lot of revolutionary communities in terms of like, so I think it's Jackson, Mississippi. I could totally be wrong, but there is a community where it's primarily black people who the economy's shit. They faced serious persecution in that community because there's a lot of latent racism and all that shit, and they've formed their own kind of counterculture community where they've bought huge tracts of land by pooling resources for their own use. They do things called timeshare, where it's like you identify the skills everyone in your community has, and instead of trading money for services, you trade service for service.
Next, yeah.
So, it's like, Jimmy went and fixed Bob's porch, so now Fred is going to go do this for him.
Totally.
And it's just kind of like this exchange of service.
Yeah.
And so that's a revolutionary idea. It's completely overthrowing the basis of relations that currently exists for an alternative.
Well, and I think that also for me, like that the biggest thing that like comes to mind there is like it also completely changes the economy too.
Yeah.
And I think in a very, very good way where like you try to, because like money's always been an issue for me because I feel like it's such an easy way to get corrupted, but you look at the premises for like money and you're like, okay, well I could see why it's good because like you can't grow corn every fucking season. Like you have to be able to sell your corn and
money
then have...
is very useful as an exchange.
But what I'm saying is that you get those premises of why you need money, and now if we look again at money, it's like, wait, do we like really need money? Like what is that? Because you're talking about exchanging services, and you say, well, you can't grow food all the time. It's like, now we can.
Yeah.
So now if someone just can go down to the food making place and then go make some food for a little bit and then they can like get something else from it, it's like...
See, now you're talking communism. To each according to his need and from each according to his ability.
I would have to like look into that kind of...
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that's a bad... I mean, we're talking the theory of communism as opposed to the reality that came about of government control.
And I'm not 100% even saying right now that I think that money would not have its place, because we've talked about that before, you and I, where we think that there should be like, the idea would be like two different types of money, but like more on like there should be one that is about for resources that you need to survive, and then there's something that for more of the luxury type stuff.
A two-track economy, one for necessities, one for non-commodities.
And that's probably what I would say is like that would be the next step for that.
So I've thought in a similar way. I didn't use money for it. I just thought in terms of like, okay, so you make the money economy better by democratizing it.
Yeah.
Then you use government to provide the basic necessities of life.
Totally.
And I don't even necessarily mean food. Maybe food. You're starving, sure. But I was thinking more like, healthcare, education, really basic public housing that's available at a really affordable rate, shit like that.
Totally.
Where it's like you make that floor of basic life dignity for everyone.
Yeah.
And then, once you have that bare minimum of acceptable living standard, then everything else is a matter of, competition and variable and marketplace interaction and all that shit.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, the thing with the government thing, like with the government just like giving you the like the necessities, I totally want to, but I was thinking about that today actually, and it's just difficult because you still have to account for the people who are making that happen, and is that like for the individuals who are like doing the work that requires getting the like resources to the people. So unless we like robotically do all of that, then maybe then at that
Well, are you talking like things like food now, or are you talking like
let's
healthcare, education?
Yeah, I mean healthcare and education. If we do healthcare, how are you going to pay the doctors?
Well, with that, I mean, just taking the Medicare for All example that's currently being discussed is, it's something paid for by our taxes.
Right.
We pay the government our taxes.
Right.
Businesses do, it's progressive, obviously.
Right.
And then you still have private doctors, and the government pays them the bill from that tax fund. And then the government lowers prices, since the doctors only get their money from the government. The pharmaceuticals only get their money from the government.
Okay.
There's one source of the money.
Right.
And therefore, there's a fuck ton of leverage. I mean, think of it as like a labor union, except it's literally all of labor.
Totally.
And so they can negotiate to lower prices. They can be like, no, you're charging too much. You have nowhere else to go, so you're going to charge less.
Yeah.
So it keeps it affordable, and I mean that incentive, the profit's still there. It's not going to be as egregious, but
The only thing I worry, like, I think actually healthcare is probably the most complex one. I think with water, it's like a pretty easy thing, and with food, I think it's a pretty easy thing.
Yeah.
But I think with the only reason why I think it's difficult with medical is just because there is a skill level there. I don't think it's very skill oriented to get water places, and I don't think it's skill oriented.
What about a Medicare for All system, for example, would make it difficult in terms of like getting that skill level from the doctors? Like, why is that harder than what we currently have?
I think it's difficult because doctors can charge, and hospitals too, can charge whatever they want because they, well, quote unquote, it's difficult. There's so much corruption going on right now,
Right.
so I'm just going to go into like what I think like is the structure that they're talking about regardless of the corruption. But like it would be like if you have a doctor who is better at performing surgery, it's like that has a better like life percentage or whatever, people coming out alive and like healthy and done well.
Yeah.
They would ultimately get paid more than a doctor who is like, he was able to get through med school and stuff, but he does have like a lower percentage, or like maybe you are more scarred, or you're more, there's like he's not as good in
Right.
that way. So in that, I think that they try to say, okay, well, this doctor who is like a better doctor, quote unquote, a better doctor is a more skilled doctor, gets to be paid more than the one who's not.
Right.
And so I think that if the case would be that like it's healthcare for all, it would have to be that internally they were able to assess skill level, and then that those doctors were getting paid more.
Well, I think that would likely come out in terms. There's probably a couple ways you could do that. I mean, first of all, there's going to be the more skilled doctors can do the more difficult things, and those things are going to cost more, so they can pay that doctor more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because like there's going to be a higher bill for like some hardcore mega surgery than there is for like a checkup.
Right, but not maybe for resources.
What do you mean?
Maybe it's like if we just say that like but the surgeries are time intensive, it's just there's like the more difficult thing is like maybe a procedure it has to be is like it's a harder procedure because there's a greater chance for a screw up,
Yeah.
right? Literally all you're doing is it's not based on the materials needed to conduct that surgery, but it's purely based on if a doctor can do it. You know what I mean? So like you're putting skill into the resources. That's what I'm just saying is like it's difficult. That's why it becomes more difficult, because it's like you're gonna have to account for different skill levels, not from just like the materials used, but also just like the person. And so
Right.
I don't know. I think it can become difficult to assess that. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that's why it's more complex than something about like getting water places,
Right.
or someone who delivers.
How do you
food.
compensate the more skilled workers in
Yeah.
something like medical?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's that compensation issue, but there's also I think what is a more important issue, which is that skill being used to service the needs of regular people?
Right.
Because like when we look at our medical system compared to like other Western countries, we have some of the best medical equipment and knowledge in the world, but that generally doesn't serve the average population. Our
Right.
average outcomes are actually worse than in Europe,
Mm.
and our average costs are way higher.
Yeah.
We're paying more for less.
Right.
And we go, oh, well, look at these amazing doctors and technology we have. It's like, okay, well, are those just serving the wealthy? Is that all they're doing? Because the average person's getting shit.
Right.
So,
Right.
how important is your skill if it's not helping people?
Well,
Well-
there's certainly a lot of incentive to not go to the doctor when it's a bunch of money,
Exactly.
and I think that's has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
People just aren't going when they need to, and then by the time they go,
Mhm.
things
It's
are way worse.
It's way worse.
So
Absolutely.
my thing is, are doctors getting paid too much? Or is there something in between where we get like hospitals who are charging too much and then still paying their doctors not enough?
Right.
So like that's why I'm saying like that's why it's more complex, I guess. You know, it's because it's like if we're saying something's fucked up in that system, right?
Yeah.
People are not being able to go to the doctors because they cost too much money. So if it costs too much money, then we have to figure out who's fucking up in that.
Yeah. Well.
Is it the doctors who are getting paid too much, or is it the
Well,
hospitals that are
it's
charging
a big
too much?
combination. I mean, pharmaceuticals are way more expensive here. You know, hospitals way more expensive. Doctors way more expensive. I mean, it's everything.
Totally.
It's a huge, complex of money making.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that I think is really interesting too. Again, like it comes to the either the intellectual or the skill value. That
Better give that
is-
puppy some attention,
I
Drew.
know, right? Like, yeah, you're right there. It's like this. It's skill or intellectual, like I guess quote unquote profit or something like that. That we haven't really figured out.
Yeah.
Because like for pharmaceuticals, it's like okay, you're making a medicine, great. You're maybe curing a crazy ass disease. That's awesome too. But for some reason, you think people should need to pay $400 a pill for it, and that's like, I mean, I get that you're saving everyone's life, and that's fucking wonderful, but you're being a dick about it. So, like, what do you do then? You know?
Yeah, that's an interesting issue because it does cost an inordinate amount of money to develop a drug and get it to the market
Totally.
in our economy.
Yeah.
And so there may be a lot of problems with that sort of thing because we want there to be enough incentive for those drug companies to actually go through all of that rigmarole. And so it's important that they get the payout at the end in some way, like so that incentive exists. And I'm not saying that fronting, like that cost onto the consumer is the best way to do it because then you end up as like this sort of not merchant of death, but you're
Sort
like
of.
you're selling people something that they basically have to buy or die, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a shitty situation, but
It's not really a market because there's no choice.
exactly.
Yeah.
But by the same token, I think it's important that we have that incentive there. So
Right.
I
Well, but then
think-
the question comes about: should we leave that as a market? So if
Yeah,
we're
I
paying
think-
the cost anyway, why don't we just directly fund research through the government?
See, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Because I think we'll save more money that way anyway.
I
And now
agree.
we can publicly decide where we want to be spending our research.
Totally.
And I think with something like medicine, that kind of direction for research is probably more important than profit making as an incentive. I mean, what incentive is there in a profit market to cure cancer?
It's a good point. Although,
There's not, or else we would have one.
Well, I don't know
Okay,
about that,
that's
but
No,
it's-
there is plenty of money that's going to different places to make a different drug
I think it's fair
for
to say
curing the same disease.
we'd be making a lot more progress on these root health problems.
Okay, fine, whatever.
We
Yeah.
don't know if we would have cured it by
Sure.
now, but yeah.
I'm saying there's a lot of resources going to just creating the same exact cure in a slightly different way so that they can patent it and then sell that
Yeah,
for
and
just
we
a little bit.
target the
That
symptoms,
is
not the disease, and
It just for something like medicine where it is you're dealing with biochemical processes. It's like we don't need a gajillion different types of things unless we're talking antibiotics, where you have a different disease and they have a different like biochemical structure, and so you have to do it. It's like there is a very material like engineering function that's occurring that we don't need to have 20 different waters. We can have one water. We can have the same thing for a pill for like a disorder like creating insulin for those with diabetes. It's like you don't need to create 20 different types of insulin.
for those who cannot see, we're laughing because my dog is jumping on Sean and Drew with great affection.
So
what you're saying is that you think that healthcare, or at least pharmaceuticals, are purposefully redundant.
yeah, definitely
I
for
think
profit.
that happens, but I also think that it's less often than it seems like you are making it out to be.
I
think
don't
there's a lot
necessarily
of that
think that's
in the cancer drugs, but I also think that that's partly because we're getting slightly better at targeting them, not necessarily because they're the same thing. So I think that's a little bit of an oversimplification.
Well, it would be the idea of like why we think we need to have like a ton of different companies selling aspirin.
Well, I think it's good to have multiple companies selling the same drug.
Well,
because
actually,
that's
that
what
brings the
drives
cost
prices
down.
Exactly.
But we actually have laws in place that like stop that in a lot of cases. So, like for example, we're not allowed to import drugs from other countries, even if it's the same name brand. So like, you know, right now there are name brand drugs in Canada that cost like 1/10 as much,
Right.
and we're not allowed to import them to artificially keep prices high here.
Well, there's also probably something to do with the different testing procedures and some.
But
sort
they're
of
the same
rigmarole.
drug that's cleared here. It's literally the same brand.
I'm just saying there is, I think, many more ethical reasons to do something like medicine than there needs to be for profit. I think that like if we had a like there can be social reasons to become a doctor or a pharmaceutical. You don't need like if you're someone who cures like suffering, you get societal.
So you think it should be more in the realm of
compensation.
public servant, like a teacher or a police officer?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. I'm
What
not
do you think,
saying
Dwight?
I
You
think-
know more about this area than anyone here.
Well, I think that the problem with that is it's a little too high-minded for the world that we live in. You know, ultimately, people want to better their own
that's
lives
fair.
in a lot of ways, and sure, it's nice when you can do that and better other people's lives at the same time. But if you want the best doctors, then you need to give them the best incentive to be good and to become that doctor, or they're going to find something else. A lot of them will.
it depends. Yeah.
A lot of them will. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there will always be those people that are going into that because they just want to help people,
Yeah.
and they'll do their shit as well as they can because that's what they love. But I think you're also going to miss out on a lot of people that would have been great doctors
Right.
if they just had a little push from, you know, getting extra money or getting whatever other incentive. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't socially reward them. Obviously we should, and I think that we do to a certain degree. You know, doctors have a certain amount of revere in our society.
Prestige.
But I do think it's important to keep the incentives multifaceted. Have lots of them.
That's the problem, Sean. She wants cuddles so bad.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes difficult because I think that when you're trying to like structure this kind of thing, it's like, where are you trying to? If people are born with the ability to become a doctor, and the idea is how do we get them to become a doctor because doctors are important, I think it doesn't need to be through economic ways to entice them to become a doctor. I think if that's true, then we haven't clearly identified why it's important to become a doctor. I think if you literally feel as though the only reason why you're doing it is for the money, I think that you are very you're misunderstanding the difficulty of like suffering.
Well, sure. I don't think it should. I feel like very few doctors go in only for the money, but
Yeah.
I do think that it's important that it's there because that does entice them to go through all of the shit that they have to go through to become a doctor.
Totally.
Because they know that at the end of it, they'll be doing a job that will provide for what the lifestyle that they want,
Right.
and will also be helping people that they can feel good about.
Totally.
And so that's a nice intersection of things that people like. But, you know, in the life that we live right now, in the place that we're at economically, I think it's kind of... It's people have to balance those things. I'm sorry, but I don't think I can.
Eating too much breakfast.
No donut for me today. So anyway, I think it's important. Basically, I think everybody, as they're trying to decide what they're going to do with their life, has to sort of balance those things. It's kind of like we were talking about the other day. It's like
Totally.
we have things that we need to balance in our life. Like, what do we want to get out of our life, and what parts of that do we need to get out of our job? And then there's always the baseline of, at least, you know, the way things are structured now, we have to consider whatever job we're doing is going to be our, you know, livelihood. So how much livelihood, quote unquote, do we need, and what can we do that will provide enough?
Yeah.
So I understand where you're coming from in that, like, we shouldn't necessarily have to have any more incentive than saving lives is awesome, but just that's not the world that we live in now. You know, and if we can get to a point where that was all that was needed, you know, where everyone, but I just feel like the point, like, at which that happens is so far away from now that it's almost not worth talking about at the moment. You know what I mean? Where it's just like there's so many things that we would need to have in place for it to be just a choice.
I think literally all we would have to do is just create a medical structure, a medical school that was put on by the government, that was headed by the best the best medical teachers, that we gave them good compensation.
And then maybe like free to go to medical school.
Yeah. Because if you feel like they have to go through so much, it's like, yeah, intellectually you got to be a smart motherfucker to be able to be a doctor. You know, like not just your rando person can become one.
Right.
But part of the reason why it's so fucking difficult is because these people have to go through like years and years of being like hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt.
For sure.
And then hopefully be able to pay it when they're a doctor. So fuck that noise. That's like a ton of stress that doesn't even need to be there if we actually think that doctors are important.
I mean, I'm all for free education. I think all education should be free.
Totally.
So,
Yeah. Agreed.
but yeah,
It's
if
certainly worth it in the long run. You're
Agreed.
get's more from your investment than you're spending.
Oh, yeah.
It's
It's
just not
just-
even a question.
undeniably better.
Well, I mean,
just-
we learned that was like this big thing. So after World War II, we had, I forget what it was called. There was some bill that made it so every veteran from World War II got
The
free
GI Bill.
college, the GI Bill,
Oh,
got
yeah.
free college education. And at that time, that was a huge chunk of the population. Because, I mean, the draft and all that jazz.
Right. Yeah.
And they did research on, how much are we getting in terms of economic growth from these people going to college, getting this education.
Totally.
And I don't know the exact number, but it was significantly more than the investment. And they used it as this big validation, like, oh, this was a good idea and it's worth it and it's decided and it's definitively understood that that's a good thing.
Right.
And then it's
And
like
then
we
we didn't
don't even
apply it.
double down on
We
that,
didn't
you know?
apply it then,
Exactly.
yeah.